Hello. Welcome to How to Talk Cybersecurity to the Board. This is really a great opportunity to figure out and learn about what are those metrics that you need that's going to resonate with your board. My name is Beverly Wilkes. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Bell Cyber, and we are certainly glad to have you with us. I'm joined today by my two colleagues, Talha Iqbal, the Senior Director of the Cyber Intelligence Center, and Sharir Chaudhry, who's a Microsoft SIM Solutions Architect here at Bell Cyber. So those are the two gentlemen that are going to take you through these slides today. The most important thing for this event is you want you to be active and participate, and you can do that in English and in French. We do have automatic translation here on this call as well. So these are the steps that you can take if you would like to have this in French. These are the steps you can take to access the language in this platform so that you could have this en français. So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide. And I will introduce Sharir to go through the agenda. Oh, and just one last thing. We want this to be active, so please don't be shy. Please put your questions, comments in the chat box. And at the end of the event, we're going to answer them in the order that they were received. So Sharir, over to you, my friend.
Thank you very much, Beverly. So before we dive in, let me walk you through today's agenda. So we'll start by framing why cybersecurity reporting has become a critical boardroom issue. Next, we'll unpack what boards actually care about, things like risk, reputation, compliance, and cost. We'll then transition into connecting cybersecurity directly to the broader enterprise risk landscape, alongside financial, legal, and operational risks. From there, we'll take a look at all the kinds of metrics that resonate with the board, things such as risk exposure, cost avoidance, and resilience. We'll also explore how to balance leading and lagging indicators to give a realistic picture. From there, we'll move to bring this to life with a case study, showcasing how SOC data and Microsoft tools, for example, translate into meaningful board-level dashboards. Then we'll talk about how to present it all in a way that resonates using visuals, narratives, as well as board-friendly language to translate that into reasonable and reliable metrics. Lastly, we'll wrap it up with some practical lessons you can apply immediately in your own board conversations. And finally, we'll open up the floor to your questions. So with that being said, I'll hand it over to Talha Iqbal, Senior Director of Managed Services here at Bell Cyber.
Thank you, Sharir. Now, before we get into the how, let's first step back and talk about why this conversation matters. And it's not just for the CISOs or the IT leaders, but for the board itself. We all know that today cyber threats are escalating in both frequency and impact. Now we have moved from isolated ransomware attacks into large-scale, sophisticated attack campaigns that can disrupt entire supply chains, right? It can bring down your critical infrastructure, and threat actors are even targeting sensitive government agencies given the current geopolitical atmosphere of the world. So what used to be an IT problem is now a business survival issue. A single breach can cause financial loss, it can cause regulatory fines, it can cause reputational damage, and maybe most importantly, loss of trust from customers and stakeholders or shareholders. So when the boards, they look at cyber risk, they're no longer asking, are we patched? They're asking, could this take down our business? Now we know at the same time, regulators are stepping in. We're seeing new disclosure requirements, mandatory reporting of cyber incidents. We're seeing tighter compliance expectations around the globe. For example, in the US, the SEC now requires public companies to disclose cyber incidents within 4 days. In Canada and Europe alike, data privacy regulations are equally aggressive. That means boards can no longer claim ignorance. They are directly accountable for oversight on cybersecurity controls and cybersecurity exposure. This puts cybersecurity in the same category as financial controls. It's part of the board's governance duty and becomes a core board level responsibility. And that's what brings us to accountability, right? A decade ago, if a company suffered a breach, the CIO or the CISO might take the heat for it. But today, we're seeing lawsuits, shareholder actions, and even regulators naming board members personally. And it all started back in 2013 when there was a massive breach at Target, exposed credit card and personal data of over 70 million customers. After that, proxy advisory groups and institutional investors, they criticized the board's cybersecurity oversight. The event is often cited as a lesson learned in how governance failure directly attracts scrutiny against board level. And this shift means boards must actively engage in cyber discussions. They need the right information to make the right decisions. They need to oversee the risk. They need to demonstrate due diligence. In other words, cybersecurity is no longer just an IT issue. It's a governance issue. It's a business issue. It belongs in the boardroom conversations along other governance or business risk indicators, whether it's legal, compliance, regulation, whatever the case may be. So this is why we're here today. The threats are growing, the regulators are watching, and the accountability now sits with the board. The challenge, however, is how do we as security leaders talk to the board in a language that they understand? That's where metrics come in. Not every number, not every technical detail, but key metrics that really matter. And we're going to explore how to use them in board level conversations. So now that we've established why cybersecurity is a board level issue, let's talk about what the board actually cares about. Because the truth is, they don't care about your firewall log data, they don't care about patches, they don't care about intrusion detection events, at least not directly. What they do care about are four things: risk, reputation, compliance, and cost. First and foremost, the board, they think in terms of risk. Cybersecurity needs to be presented the same way they look at financial risk, the same way they look at legal concerns or operational risk. So instead of saying, we blocked 2 million attacks last quarter, you frame it as, here are the top 3 risks to our business from a cyber perspective, and here's how we're going to mitigate them. Keep in mind that the risk language is familiar to the board. They understand the likelihood, they understand the impact, they understand the exposure. So if you speak that language, you immediately capture their attention. Now, next, there's reputation. A data breach doesn't just cost money, it destroys trust. And for many organizations, trust is their most valuable asset. Board members care deeply about customer confidence. They care about shareholder confidence. They care about public perception. The question they're asking is, if we face a breach, how do we A, protect our reputation, and B, preserve brand trust? Hence, the important question is, do our cybersecurity metrics highlight the organization's resilience and preparedness that speaks directly to the board's reputational concern? Which brings us to our third piece, which is compliance. Now, boards are increasingly held responsible for meeting regulatory and industry standards, whether it's privacy laws, financial sector rules, or critical infrastructure requirements. For them, compliance is all about avoiding penalties, avoiding lawsuits, avoiding legal exposure. So when you tie cybersecurity metrics to compliance obligations, you connect security directly to a governance responsibility that they already understand. And finally, there's cost. Boards are constantly balancing investments against outcomes. They want to know, if we spend on cybersecurity, how much risk are we reducing? What's the return on that investment? This is where showing metrics around cost avoidance, around reduction of downtime, or savings from faster response times, that is what really resonates with the board. You should be connecting dollars spent to dollars protected. So when you present to the board, it's not about the number of vulnerabilities patched, number of phishing emails blocked. It's about translating security into 4 outcomes: risk, reputation, compliance, and cost. If we anchor our conversation in those terms, security stops sounding like a technical expense and starts sounding like a business enabler. And that is what brings us to our next challenge. How do we avoid technical traps and actually make our message stick with the board? One of the biggest challenge in board conversations is the translation gap. Too often we as security leaders bring technical metrics to the board while the board is focused on business priorities. And when those two don't line up, the message is lost. Security professionals naturally we track things like malware signatures blocked, IPS attacks prevented, number of vulnerabilities patched, elevation of privilege, unauthorized access. But when you present those numbers to the board, they often don't connect. Why? Because the board isn't thinking about scanning activities, the board isn't concerned about vulnerabilities, or they don't understand the execution of malicious script. They're thinking, are we exposed to this risk? Could this disrupt business operations? What's our liability? So we are speaking two different languages. One is deeply technical, the other one is strategic. And one of the most common mistakes, and that's our first pitfall, is giving too much detail. Imagine presenting a 30-page vulnerability scan report to the board. You're going to lose them their interest, right? They don't need every data point. They need the story behind the data. They need to know what's trending. They need to know what's improving. They need to know what still puts the organization at risk. Now, the second pitfall is jargon. Terms like EDR telemetry, zero-day exploits, SIM correlation rules, they make sense to us, but for the board members, it creates distance. Jargon turns your update into a black box. If the board don't understand, they can't act. And if they can't act, they can't provide oversight. That's where we start to lose credibility. And the third pitfall is misalignment. This happens when the metrics we show don't tie back to the organization's strategy. For example, we might be celebrating a 95% patch compliance rate. Well, that means very little if the 5% unpatched systems are critical servers tied to revenue streams. Hence, metrics must connect directly to business impact. Otherwise, the board walks away thinking cybersecurity is just a cost center instead of a risk management function. So the real concern, apart from cyber threats, is the communication gap. If we overwhelm the board with details, we lean too much on jargon, or we misalign with business priorities, we are at risk of losing the board's attention. So the key is to bridge the gap. Translate technical measures into business aligned metrics. And the way to fix that is to reframe security in the same terms the board already uses, and that's enterprise risk. Boards are used to looking at portfolios of risks. They understand financial risk, they understand operational risk, they understand legal risk, they understand reputational risk. So cybersecurity should now sit directly in that mix. A data breach can cause as much financial loss as a supply chain breakdown. A ransomware attack can halt operations just like a natural disaster. A privacy violation can trigger legal action just like fraud or misconduct. So by positioning cybersecurity alongside these risks, we make it clear it's not a separate IT concern, it's a core business risk. So to speak the language of risk, we need to shift how we present our metrics. Keep in mind, boards, they're not interested in packet counts. They're not interested in system uptime. What they want to know is the likelihood of a major cyber incident, the impact, both financially, legally, and reputational impact of that cyber incident. And they need to understand what controls are in place and how effective are those controls. Now, this is the same language they're already used to for financial risk, for operational risk. So the moment we frame cybersecurity in those terms, using those terminologies, we are aligned. And the strongest organizations are the ones that include cybersecurity into their enterprise risk management framework. See, cyber is given a seat at the same table as finance and compliance. Our risk registers should now include cyber incidents, right alongside market risk, right alongside supply chain risk. And boards, they expect to see cyber risk scenarios analyzed, prioritized, and quantified in dollars. This allows them to gain confidence that we're not just tracking threats, but we're managing business risk holistically. So when we talk about cybersecurity to the board, we're not just asking for extra attention. We are positioning it as part of the broader risk landscape that they already oversee. In financial risk, it threatens the shareholder value. Legal risk threatens compliance. Then cyber risk threatens business continuity itself. And that's the bridge, positioning cybersecurity in risk management language that the board already understands. Now, in order to do so, we need to use the right metrics because the wrong metrics can undermine that message. So, metrics that don't work when we're speaking to the board are important to understand because that's a common mistake most individuals make when they present to the board. One of the common ones is patch counts, right? If you're presenting to the board the number of vulnerabilities that were patched in a given month or in a given quarter, for the board, that's meaningless. If I say we patched 10,000 vulnerabilities last quarter, well, they don't know if that's good or bad. What they want to know is, are critical systems exposed? Are the vulnerabilities that matter most to our business under control? The raw number itself doesn't answer that question, right? Another set of metrics that fail and are regularly reported are metrics on firewall log data or intrusion attempts that were blocked. Well, when you show the board that you blocked 2 million attacks, it might sound impressive, and I'm guilty of presenting that. It doesn't actually connect to the risk. Boards, they know that they're constantly under attack, right? They know that the threat landscape is ever evolving. What they want to know is, did any of those attack vectors get through? Were any of them successful? And are we resilient if there was a successful attack? They need to understand what's the risk to their operations if one of their security controls or defenses fail. So we need to ensure that the metrics answer those questions, answer the questions around resiliency, the risk to operations, and our business continuity and disaster recovery plan. Now, some other technical measures like, let's say, CPU utilization, IDS alerts, password reset volumes, users enrolled in phishing or security awareness training. They're useful for IT teams, but they don't tell the board whether the organization is safer today than it was yesterday. The board, they want clarity. They don't want noise. And if the metric doesn't connect to business impact, if it doesn't reflect reduced downtime, if it doesn't reflect reduced liability or reduced exposure, it's not a board level metric. Now, the reason that these metrics don't resonate is simple. They don't answer the questions the board are accountable for. They don't show risk in dollar value. They don't connect to reputation or compliance. They don't help the board making decisions about investment or oversight. And that's when we start to lose focus. If we focus on technical vanity metrics, we lose their attention, right? And we lose their confidence. So the takeaway here is it's not enough to just show activity. We have to show impact. The board doesn't want to know how busy we are. They want to know how secure the overall business is. So when we look at the opposite side, the kind of business aligned metrics that do resonate, now we can frame them in a board friendly language. So now let's shift gears and let's look at the ones that do matter. Let's look at the metrics that tie directly to business outcomes. And what are those business outcomes? Risk exposure, cost of incidents avoided, and cyber resiliency. So the first is risk exposure. Boards are already comfortable with this model. They understand likelihood times impact, right? That gives us the exposure. When we present cyber risk in this format, it aligns perfectly with how they view financial and operational risk. For example, instead of saying we have 500 open vulnerabilities, we need to say we have 3 critical risks with high likelihood of disrupting key operations. So instead of giving raw numbers, we frame it in terms of business impact. We frame it in terms of downtime, revenue loss, and customer trust. This gives the board a clear picture of what could happen, how likely it is to happen, and how prepared we are if it happens. Now, the second is cost of incidents avoided. See, the board, they care about dollar value, right? And when you show them metrics like our new email security reduced phishing incidents by 70%, which saved us an estimated of $2 million in potential losses. Or our automation strategy on containment reduced downtime of ransomware attacks by avoiding $500,000 in lost productivity. See, that's powerful. Why? Because you're not just showing activity, you're showing return on investment. You're showing return on investment in terms they understand, which is financial protection. Now, the third component here is cyber resilience. How quickly can we detect and recover from something that does get through? Here, metrics like mean time to detect and mean time to respond or recover, right? They're essential. But instead of presenting them as pure numbers, we need to put them in context. We have reduced our detection time from 30 days to 5 days, right? So we are showing improvement. Our recovery time has improved by 40%, which means less disruption to operations, right? This tells the board we can't stop every attack, but we are improving. When there is a successful attack, our ability to contain and bounce back is what matters. That's resilience. And resilience is what preserves business continuity. So when we show improvement, that's a win. So instead of relying on presenting raw technical count, raw technical data, we need to group them into three categories: risk exposure, cost avoided, and resilience. This gives the board a clear business-focused view of cybersecurity. Now the risk can be quantified. We can articulate how investments pays off and how prepared we are to recover. And the best way to communicate these metrics is visually through heat maps, dashboards, and simple trend charts. It's how you visualize it for the board that gives out a positive impact, right? So the boards, they don't want to sift through technical reports or spreadsheets, right? They need a clear visual snapshot of where we stand. Think about how they look at financial performance, right? So financial graphs, trend lines, red versus green, right? Cybersecurity metrics should follow the same model. If you make it simple, you visualize it, and you have high-level metrics, you give them exactly what they need to make informed decisions. And one of the most effective tools is a risk heat map. It shows risk along two axes, likelihood and impact. The board can immediately see which risks are high likelihood, high impact, therefore demand priority. So instead of scrolling through hundreds of technical risks and see the top 5 plotted in red, the heat map communicates at a glance where attention and investment should go. It takes cybersecurity from an abstract problem to something that is tangible and actionable. Another powerful tool is the traffic light indicator. For example, when you summarize your security posture, red is critical gaps that needs immediate action. Yellow are areas of improvement, right? Areas of moderate concern where progress is underway. Green, where controls are mature and effective and measurable. Now, boards, they love this format because it's familiar, it's simple, and it immediately highlights where risk is concentrated. Now, trend charts, they also help the board see progress over time, reduction in average detection time over the last 3 quarters, downward trend in phishing incident, increased compliance coverage across critical systems. So dashboards combined with heat maps, traffic lights, and trends, they give the board a living snapshot of cyber risk in the same way that already monitor finances and operations risk. So the key is not just to present data, but to tell a story visually, right? A board member should be able to look at the dashboard, look at the heat map, and instantly understand where the organization is exposed, where improvements are happening, and where investments are needed. So to connect these visuals back to recognized framework, over the next slide, we're going to talk about what frameworks we can use in order to articulate key metrics that are important. These aren't just checklists, right? They're standards that regulators, auditors, and peers, they respect, right? We are measuring security in a way that is recognized and trusted outside of this room. So let's start with CIS, Center for Internet Security Critical Security Controls. They are a set of prioritized best practice. They're very practical, they're very tactical. Think of them as 20, well now 18, key or most important things every organization should do to reduce the most common cyber risk. So when we take our metrics and we tie them to CIS, right? We tie them to critical security controls. We can show the board, here's our level of coverage across the controls that matter the most. It's a way to communicate how well we are addressing the basics, which often prevents over 90% of real-world attacks. Then we have the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is probably the most widely used framework in North America, right? It organizes cybersecurity into 5 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, right? Now, boards, they like NIST because it's simple, it's structured, and it's comprehensive. It allows us to show maturity across the whole life cycle of risk management, from understanding what we need to protect, all the way to recovering after an incident, and that's the language that the board understands. Now, from a global standpoint, we have the ISO 27000 series, especially ISO 27001, which is gold standard for information security management. While NIST provides a framework, ISO is about certification and continuous improvement, right? And boards, they appreciate ISO because it's recognized internationally, because it signals to customers and regulators that we meet a formal audited standard. So presenting metrics in ISO terms shows the board not just that we are secure, but that we're aligned to a globally accepted benchmark. Now, on technical side of things, right, or more on the threat side, we have the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Unlike NIST or ISO or CIS, MITRE is about mapping what attackers actually do. So we're looking at the tactics and the techniques that are used by threat actors, and we're showing the board that we're not just compliant, but that we are measuring our ability to detect and defend against real-world attacks. It's a way to prove our defenses, right? And to prove that our defenses are tested against techniques that are used in the wild, techniques that are used to target organizations. So we have learned from that, and we have not just theoretical standards, but a practical way to improve our defenses and mature our security posture. Now, there are other regulatory frameworks like SOX, GDPR, PCI, HIPAA, NERC-CIP, FERPA, you name it, right? This is where the board immediately pays attention because these frameworks, they come with legal and financial consequences. Non-compliance can mean finances, issues, right? So non-compliance can lead to fines, lawsuits, or even reputational damage, right? It will hinder our ability to do business. So when we map our metrics to regulatory requirements, we're showing the board not just how we reduce cyber risk, but how we protect the organization from legal exposure. So whether it's CIS, whether it's NIST, whether it's ISO, or MITRE for real-world threats, the key is compliance, right? Our metrics should be tied to these frameworks. This allows us to build credibility. It allows us to show maturity, and it gives the board confidence that we are aligned to recognize standards, not just our own definition, but things that have been proven and respected by people outside of this room. Now, in addition to frameworks that gives structure to our metrics, there's another important distinction that we need to make when presenting to the board: the difference between leading and lagging indicators. Now, what exactly are leading indicators? Leading indicators are measures of prevention and preparedness. They tell us how well we are reducing risk before an incident occurs, right? So it's more proactive measure. Think of it in terms of what percentage of critical systems have MFA enabled, right? What percentage of staff passed phishing awareness training? Um, Patch cycle for critical vulnerabilities on critical systems, right? These are proactive measures. They show we're investing in security to reduce the chances of a breach in the first place, right? Boards, they like this because it demonstrates prevention and foresight. Now, on the other hand, we have lagging indicators, which means that we are measuring outcomes after something has happened. So think of them as more reactive measures, right? So mean time to detect and mean time to respond. On its own, it means nothing, but trending them over time can tell us if we are improving on detection and response. Number of reportable incidents in the last quarter. How many incidents were successfully detected and resolved, and how many of them were critical enough or true positive to be reported? Financial losses or downtime due to those cyber events. Now, lagging indicators are critical because they show real impact. They show the resiliency of the organization. Now, boards, they need to see that to understand how effective our defenses are from a reactive measure, right? How resilient the organization is. What is our ability to respond and recover from a successful attack? So the key is balance. If we only report leading indicators, the board may think we are bulletproof, and that's unrealistic. If we only report lagging indicators, it may sound like we're always reacting to bad news, right? But when we combine the two, we're telling a more compelling, a complete story. We need to focus on here's what we're doing to prevent incident. Here's how we performed when something does slip through. That's the real measure of cyber resilience, both protection and recovery. Now, when we're talking about how to present that, right? How to take the leading indicators as an early warning radar and lagging indicators as a black box recorder, we can find a good balance. So we take 3 or 4 leading indicators and we take 3 or 4 lagging indicators. The leading indicators highlight progress in prevention. The lagging indicators show how well we respond to minimize the impact, right? So we see the best of both worlds, both proactive posture and real world resilience. Now, I would request Shiryar to bring this to life with a case study example showing how Bell Cyber and metrics we collect in our SOC and security technologies such as Microsoft suite of products use these concepts to frame meaningful board conversations. Keep in mind, it's all about maintaining that balance, right? It's all about choosing the right leading and lagging indicators. It's all about business alignment. So over to Shiryar to present us with some case study examples.
All right. Thank you, Talha. So we've talked theory so far, metrics, frameworks, leading versus lagging, but what does this actually look like in practice, right? Let's walk through a case study of how Bell Cyber and our managed security tools work together to generate meaningful board level metrics. At Bell Cyber, I would say our SOC is the nerve center of security operations, and every second of every day, it's flooded with technical signals, things such as alerts, logs, incidents, vulnerabilities from over 150 unique customers. The sheer volume of this is staggering, and on their own, these numbers don't really mean much to a board level audience. So using SOC data as foundation, every month, our SOC processes millions of logs, thousands of alerts, as well as hundreds of incidents. And that's the daily reality of modern security operations. But for the board, raw numbers like this are just noise. If I walk in and say we processed 200,000 alerts last month, the natural question is, so what? Are we safer? Are we more exposed? How does this affect our business? That's the key challenge. Security teams have incredible versatility and visibility, but unless we translate these metrics into business risk, it doesn't really create value at a governance level, as Talha mentioned. So instead of reporting raw volume, we focus on what matters to you, translating this technical volume into business-aligned insights. So instead of, let's say, 200,000 alerts being reported, we can shift the focus into discussing 15 threats that actually targeted core revenue systems. Instead of 10,000 vulnerabilities detected, we can discuss 3 critical issues in customer-facing platforms, which were remediated and patched within established SLA metrics. And instead of 400 phishing incidents being detected, we can instead say there were 12 targeted attempts against executives, which were stopped before compromise. This sort of translation shifts the conversation from alert fatigue to risk avoidance, and from workload to outcomes. And the reason we can do this is the visibility we've built with modern platforms. So things such as Microsoft Sentinel for SIEM, or really any SIEM platform in this case, Defender for Endpoint, Defender for XDR, Entra ID for identity protection, alongside NDR solutions, vulnerability management solutions, as well as secure gateways. We can use these together to give us a unified visibility across any one environment. So across endpoints, across identities, across networks, across your cloud workloads, instead of individual siloed point solutions. We can map these outputs into categories that make sense at this level. So, for example, phishing attempts blocked can be translated to fraud losses avoided. Time to detect lateral movement, detected through SIM solutions usually, can be translated to reduced blast radius of an attack or a threat vector. And lastly, compliance gaps in the cloud in this case can be translated to regulatory and contractual exposure for an asset or multiple assets. In one recent scenario, we detected a potential ransomware attack early through Defender telemetry, as well as data from Microsoft Sentinel. We had automated detections, correlations, and incident response workflows. Hence, through these tools, we're able to contain it within minutes, and we avoided hours of downtime and significant financial impact. It's the perfect demonstration of resilience in this case, because we weren't just attacked, we bounced back without a major disruption. The speed of response and the cost avoided is exactly the kind of metric board members value. I would say the takeaway for you as board members would be this. You don't need to see how many logs we process, really. What matters is our trends. So mean time to detect and respond, or MTD and MTDR, is improving quarter after quarter. Our impact, so real-world cases where faster detection prevented downtime and avoided significant financial loss, as well as our resilience, the ability to not just withstand attacks, but to recover quickly without any major disruption. That's the story that these metrics tell, where cybersecurity is not just a technical cost center, but it's a driver of business continuity and trust. So that's the picture that we want to paint with these sorts of metrics that we're looking to provide or suggesting to provide to your board members. Now, one of the most effective ways to bring cybersecurity into the boardroom is to make it visual, simple, and tied to business outcomes. As Hala had mentioned previously, these dashboards do exactly that. They turn raw SOC data into decision-ready insights. So let's dig a bit deeper into these issues. We have, first of all, a risk heat map, the top left, which instantly shows the top threats that are facing our business ranked by likelihood and impact. Now, instead of talking about millions of alerts, we can then translate them into categories that you care about. So things like phishing, ransomware, insider threats, vulnerabilities, and misconfigurations, just to name a few. And this heat map, of course, is fed in real time from our security tools. So you're seeing essentially what is a live picture of where the organization is most exposed. In this scenario, phishing remains our number one likelihood risk, and that's also prevalent across multiple different organizations. And then ransomware ranks highest in potential impact, whereas misconfigurations, for example, continue to appear, but at a more manageable level with a lower risk. And this sort of dashboard or heat map instantly answers the board's key question. Where are we most at risk today? Next, we have the cost avoidance chart. On the financial side, the cost avoidance chart shows security wins in terms of money saved. Rather than saying, for example, we blocked 1,200 phishing emails, we can say those blocked attempts from phishing incidents prevented an estimated 1.7 million in fraud and data losses. And this kind of reframes the cybersecurity environment from being just a cost of doing business into being a value protector. So reducing fraud losses, protecting revenue streams, as well as avoiding regulatory penalties, which is also a big concern. For example, looking at the chart there, containing one compromised server with sensitive data after a potential ransomware attempt saved over $1.2 million in potential loss, and blocking thousands of targeted phishing attempts prevented executives from being compromised, which would have triggered customer trust and shareholder value issues, and in turn prevented an estimated loss of 500,000, just as an example scenario. This is more so about showing security as an investment with measurable return on investment, or ROI. And finally, resilience. So we have resilience metrics as the last metric here, and this essentially represents how quickly do we detect, contain, and recover from an attack. In Q1, for example, it took us 2 weeks to spot an attack, but by Q3, we're down to 2 days. Our mean time to respond has dropped from 10 days to under 24 hours, and that's a dramatic improvement and shows a clear downward trend. And it's essentially the result of automation, process maturity, as well as skilled analysts working together in a SOC environment. We can also track recovery against business expectations. So metrics such as recovery time objective, or RTOs, can be used to measure maximum downtime that the business can tolerate. And secondly, recovery point objective, or RPO, can be used to measure maximum data loss that the business can afford. Both RTO and RPO are now trending towards targets set by the business, which gives assurance that even if an attack succeeds, we can bounce back quickly, limit impact, and keep operations online. The key takeaway from this is that by combining Bell Cyber's SOC data obtained from managed security tools such as Microsoft Security Ecosystem, so Sentinel, Defender, any third-party tools as well, we can move from raw technical numbers to board-ready metrics. We can now answer the questions that matter at your level. Where are we most exposed? How much risk and cost are we avoiding? And are we getting faster, stronger, and more resilient? And that brings us to the next piece of the puzzle. How do we take those metrics and actually tell a compelling story in the boardroom? So we engage in what we call storytelling with metrics. Up until now, we focused on what to measure, risk, resilience, and cost avoidance. But just as important is how we tell the story, because numbers on their own don't move the board, narratives do. So first we'll discuss turning those numbers into narratives. When we talk to a board, we have to translate technical metrics into a business story. So for example, instead of MTTD, or mean time to detect, being 2 days, the narrative can instead be, we can now spot attacks a week faster than last quarter, which reduces our exposure window by 80%. Instead of phishing attempts blocked with a 5,000 count, the story can be, we stopped multiple attempts to compromise executive accounts, protecting customer data and shareholder confidence. The number itself is important, and it's very valuable to the technical individuals, SOC analysts, and so on, but it only resonates when it's tied to actual impact and meaning. Otherwise, it's just that technical jargon, as Talha mentioned. So we'll frame it around risk reduction, one of the most effective methods of narratives. Board members want to know, are we safer than yesterday? So you frame the metrics in that light. So high-risk vulnerabilities in revenue systems dropped 60% this quarter, as an example. Or third-party risk exposure decreased as 80% of critical vendors passed their latest security assessment. This tells a clear story that risk is trending down and investments are paying off. Metrics such as these provide confidence to the board to keep investing in cybersecurity. Again, you're not exaggerating the facts. You're instead translating those facts into tangible metrics that the board will understand and action on. And the next theme in this case would be resilience. It's not about preventing every attack. That's not really entirely possible. There's always new forms of attack vectors emerging, and we all always have to play the catch-up game with some threat actors, or we can get ahead of it. But it's not really about that. It's more about showcasing that we can withstand an attack if we were to be targeted. Metrics like MTTD, MTTR, RTO, RPO, they all come to life when we put them in a narrative form. So, for example, we reduced recovery time from 3 days to under 12 hours, and thus ensuring that business operations continued with minimal disruption. It showcases that it's not just a metric. There's a story about protecting revenue and customers when it matters most, and highlighting operational efficiency with respect to resilience. And finally, there's readiness. Boards care about whether we're prepared for what's coming. And here, the story isn't just about past performance, but future assurances that we can give. So things like we conducted 2 cyber incident simulations with the executive team, ensuring alignment on decision-making in a crisis situation, or we achieved, for example, 95% compliance with our cyber training program, strengthening our first line of defense. It shows the board members that we're not just reactive, we're proactive. And it prepares the business for tomorrow's threats, gives assurances that the organization is in good hands and ready for what may come based on new and emerging threats within the cybersecurity landscape. So the real power isn't in the raw numbers, really. It's in the story that we tell with them. When we frame metrics around risk reduction, resilience, and readiness, we give the board clarity, confidence, and context. And that's what transforms our cybersecurity updates from noise into a narrative that they can act on and they have tangible value with. Next, we'll take a look at how to engage the board in these conversations, making sure that they not only hear the story, but also lean into it with questions and guidance. So far, we've talked about reporting in ways that the board understands, but the other side of the coin is making sure we're actually measuring what matters. That's one of the key slogans and messages of this webinar, because if we measure the wrong things, we risk giving the board false confidence or overwhelming them with noise. First, we have risk exposure and resilience. This category is about whether we're vulnerable, and if we are, how fast can we bounce back? So we covered that just a bit ago, but let's look at it in a bit more detail. Instead of raw number of alerts, we can take a look at what percentage of our critical systems are patched on time, and in a way, also look at a trend chart to see if we're improving on our patching schedule or our patch timings or not. Next, how fast can we detect and contain threats that are reported through MTTD and MTTR? Whether we meet our recovery objectives, things like RTO and RPO when an outage hits. These are all key metrics and key tangible values that we can report on and provide to the board to ensure that we have coverage and we are moving in the right direction as a cybersecurity organization or through our cybersecurity group, in the company. In business terms, it's essentially saying, can we keep the operations running under pressure? Can we absorb the hit and still serve customers? You can purchase and have all the tools in the world in your environment, but how is it really affecting the company's performance in a meaningful way? That's the question we have to answer. Secondly, we have business impact and cost avoidance. This is about value protection in essence. Every phishing email blocked, every ransomware attempt contained, and every hour of downtime avoided translates into financial impact and mitigated financial losses. Here, we measure things like estimated loss avoided, downtime prevented, and the percentage of incidents with no customer impact or minimal customer impact. This shows cybersecurity more as a driver of risk reduction and not just the line item in the budget that can be forgotten. Thirdly, we have compliance and governance, an area you as directors or board members are directly accountable for in terms of reporting and utilizing as a guiding light to move forward within your organization. We track adherence to regulations, how many incidents cross reporting thresholds, vendor compliance rates, and how quickly we close audit findings. Compliance failures don't just hit security operations or your SOC team, they carry regulatory penalties as well as reputational fallout. This is about assurance that our security program meets legal and contractual obligations and that gaps present within the environment don't linger. Lastly, we have readiness and continuous improvement. We measure how prepared we are for the future, and this includes employee resilience through awareness training or phishing simulation training or cybersecurity awareness training. the number of simulation exercises we run with executives and the board, how much of our spending is risk aligned, as well as our year-over-year maturity improvement against frameworks like NIST, CIS, MITRE, and so on. These metrics demonstrate that we're not just standing still, we're building resilience over time. And put together, these 4 categories give you a complete picture. You're asking the following questions here, right? You're asking, are we exposed? What impact are we avoiding? Are we compliant with obligations and regulations? And how are we improving year after year? That's how we turn security metrics into a governance conversation, and how you gain confidence that we're both protecting operations and reputation. Next slide, please. So once we measure the right things, the next step is reporting them in a way that actually resonates with the board. And this is where so many organizations stumble. We overwhelm board members with data, or we share metrics that don't connect to business impact. So let's talk about how to report what matters. We talked about measuring, let's talk about how to translate that. We want to first focus on metrics that show business risk and resilience. And we can do this by framing discussions around the few risks that could materially affect business continuity, customer trust, or revenue. And in this case, some example board level questions could be, what are our top risks? How bad would the impact be if they materialize? And how well would we bounce back? This shifts the focus from operational metrics like patch counts to outcomes directors and the board would understand. So the 3 key values in this case would be continuity, resilience, and exposure. Next, we want to translate technical outcomes into board language. We want to avoid presenting raw technical data. So we don't want to discuss firewall logs, vulnerability counts, number of incidents. This is all, again, technical jargon that doesn't translate into real life value. Instead, we want to connect these metrics to outcomes. These are the risks facing our revenue systems. This is how quickly we can spot and contain them. And this is the value that we've preserved by stopping these attacks and the financial reputational value that we've protected. I want to make a note to say that we want to emphasize financial protection and reputation. It's essentially the language of governance and what matters the most in these sorts of situations. Thirdly, keep your dashboards simple, visual, and business focused. Dashboards should answer the board's core questions. What are the biggest risks? Are we improving? Are we prepared for the next wave of emerging threats? What's the potential financial impact if these risks materialize? How do we compare to industry benchmarks or peers? You can do comparative analysis with standards like NIST or CIS against other customers or industry peers, and this can provide you valuable insight into these sorts of metrics. And lastly, are your investments delivering measurable returns with respect to risk reduction? What sort of value essentially is being provided by investing into a SOC or cybersecurity as a whole? For these, you can use visuals like heat maps, traffic light indicators, as well as trend lines. These resonate far more than just generic tables of data. Lastly, we want to show progress over time, not just snapshots. Boards want to see improvement, not just point-in-time status. So using a previous example, in Q1, threat detection averaged around 14 days. In Q3, we're down to 2 days. We want to highlight continuous improvement, things like shrinking compliance gaps, reduced exposure, shorter downtime. And we want to show year-over-year resilience in a way to build confidence that the investments into cybersecurity and into the SOC are working. In short, reporting what matters means focusing on the business risks, translating technical results into business outcomes, keeping reporting simple and visual, and showing progress over time. When we do that, we shift the board conversations away from technical noise and towards what really matters: risk, resilience, and readiness. So next, I'll hand it back over to Talha to discuss the key takeaways from this session.
Perfect. Thank you, Sharyar. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with 4 key takeaways that can transform how you talk about cybersecurity at the board level. Keep in mind, boards don't want to hear about firewalls, logs, patch counts. They care about risk, reputation, compliance, and cost. So if you frame your message in those terms, you'll immediately connect with them. We need to focus on business aligned metrics, right? So shift from technical activity to business outcomes. Show risk exposure. Change your language in terms of likelihood and impact. highlight cost avoidance, demonstrate resiliency through mean time to detect, mean time to respond. Those are the numbers that matter, trended over time. So show progress, not just snapshots in time, right? One quarterly metric isn't enough. Board wants to see trends. The risks are going down, the response times are improving, and we are becoming stronger quarter over quarter or year over year. So progress over time builds confidence. And make it visual, make it simple. Use dashboards, use heat maps, use clear narratives, use storytelling, right? So take your SOC data, translate it into simple visual story. Give the board what they need: clarity, context, and confidence to act. So the bottom line is this: cybersecurity conversations with the board don't have to be technical. If you focus on outcomes, align your metrics with business priorities, and present them simply and visually, you'll not only inform the board, you'll empower them to make better decisions. And that's how cybersecurity becomes a true business enabler. With that said, we're going to open up the floor for some questions. I'll request Bev to see if there were any questions received during the webinar, and then we can answer them in a few minutes that we have remaining.
Yes. Hi there. Thank you. Again, every time we do these sessions, I learn something. Thank you very much. There are a few questions, but also keeping our eye on the clock. One of the big ones I think was really interesting is the first one. How do we keep the board informed about emerging threats like zero-day vulnerabilities without overwhelming them in technical details?
That's a great question. I know we didn't touch upon emerging threats in our presentation, but we report zero-day and emerging threats in terms of business exposure, right? So instead of saying we have a new zero-day in Microsoft Exchange, for example, we frame it like we have a critical system which is impacted, and we applied compensating control within 24 hours, and we expect the full patching within a defined SLA, right? So
Okay.
don't just focus on articulating we have a new zero-day, but focus on the impact, the likelihood of us being breached through that zero-day, and what is the current response status, right? So what's the current progress for patching that? So we keep the board aware of high priority emerging risk. At the same time, we have educated them on what our response to that issue is, with the impact, the likelihood, and the response efforts clearly outlined.
Got it. Got it. I'll do one more, then we'll have to cut it because we're getting close to our time. How do you map SOC data into risk categories for the heat map?
Another great question. So we can use a combination of tools and threat intelligence sources. So in the example that Sharyar shared, Microsoft Sentinel as a SIM solution or Microsoft Defender as an EDR. We don't have to limit ourselves to Microsoft suite of products, but any SIM solution, any EDR solution can correlate alerts across endpoints, cloud, and identity, right? So we align those findings with MITRE ATT&CK framework, for example, on how real world threat actors operate, right? And then we map it into business risk, such as ransomware, phishing, insider threat, third party compromise, right? So now we have SOC data, which is coming in from SIM correlation rules, EDR, and any other SOC tools integrated into your mesh, with board level view, such as the top risk grouped by likelihood and impact, right? So you take the data from your security tools, map it into categories, and then map it to the likelihood and the impact if it was a successful attack.
Wonderful. Guys, it's 2 p.m. Eastern. We need to jump off this call. I'm sure everybody here has questions as well. I see, Sal, you sent me a couple of questions. We will respond to those offline. Again, thank you for your time joining us here today for this webinar. Any other questions or comments, you can reach out to myself, Bev Wilkes, or Talha Iqbal, and then we'll be sure to respond to your questions. Until next time, we'll see you next month. Have a great afternoon.